Good morning, members, officers and any members of the public viewing the live stream of this meeting. Welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Corporate Governance Committee. My name is Councillor Michael Atkins. I'm the chair of this committee. My vice chair is Councillor Peter Sanford. I'll introduce other attendees when I invite them to speak. If you're in the chamber, a reminder the meeting is being live streamed. Please can I ask, if you're joining remotely, ensure that your camera and microphone are off unless you're addressing the committee. If you're present in the room, please ensure your microphone is close to you and speak clearly when addressing the room. Item 1 on our agenda today is apologies. I think we have a full house, Pippa. Am I? Yep, fantastic. Thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Do any members have interest to declare in relation to any item of business on the agenda? If an interest subsequently becomes apparent later in the meeting, please raise it at that point. I'll go to Councillor Stobart and then to Councillor Sanford. Thank you.
Chair, thank you. So I'd like to remind the committee that I'm a board member of South Cambridgeshire Investment Partnership, which does get covered later in the agenda, and also South Cambridgeshire Projects.
Thank you. I think it would be very useful to have your knowledge and expertise in the room, in particular for that investment item. But if I can't imagine why we would stray into any kind of decision-making process or anything, but obviously we'll just bear that in mind, and if it's appropriate for you to leave, we'll address it then. But mostly I want you in the room, obviously, for your information on that front. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Chair. Just my usual declaration as a non-remunerated director of South Cambs Limited, trading as Ermine Street Housing.
Thank you, Councillor Sanford. Ditto for you in terms of your expertise on that matter. Any further declarations to make at this stage? Councillor Williams.
Just the GCP is referenced. I'm an Assembly member.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. Do members have any suggested amendments relating to the accuracy of the minutes for the meeting held on the 23rd of January 2025? No, I'd like to move approval of these minutes as a true and accurate record. You happy to second?
Second.
Thank you. Agreed? Thank you. Item 4, public questions. No questions were received. So we move to item 5, which is the KPMG Auditor's Annual Report for 2023-24. I believe we're joined online by Mr. Cardoza. Could I please invite you to present this report? Thank you.
Sure, thank you, Chair. So this is a summary of all the other reports that we've brought to yourself, so I won't be taking a huge amount of your time, you'll be pleased to hear. So the ISO 260 presented at the last audit committee took you through all of the audit work that we've done for 23-24. This report is a required report that has to be produced in line with legislation that then has to be published on your website alongside your published accounts for 23-24. So it is a public document that has to go onto your website, which we've shared with Peter Fazana and the team, and has now been published on your website in line with legislation. So that's good news. So this report takes you through the first page on page 12 of your pack. Takes you through the purpose of the reports, again, in terms of reporting on the accounts work that we did, any other information that we had to take into account, the value for money work that we did, and if there were any other powers that I had to use as part of the 23-24 audit. The findings that you can see there on the right-hand side of the page 4 of our report, page 12 of your pack. So we issued a disclaimer opinion, which we always talked about with yourselves, ahead of the deadline date, so on the 27th of Feb, which was good. And again, make sure that we've actually caught up as much as we can in terms of the delays that had come through from previous audits and from EY in the previous years. The fact that we had to disclaim the opinion isn't great news, obviously, but it moves us on and moves South Cambridgeshire on into the 24-25 audit, which puts us in a fantastic place to now carry out a much fuller audit on 24-25, as I explained on the ISO 260 at the last committee. But there's still lots of work to do, which we noted at the last committee, and obviously as part of the recommendations that we've made, detail the work that needs to be done by South Cambridgeshire to enable us and South Cambridgeshire to move further and faster into 24-25, and making sure that you have a much more comprehensive set of accounts which are better evidenced, which are then able to be audited more comprehensively. But we're moving on with that with the accountants and other officers across the council. In terms of other information, there was nothing that we need to bring to your attention in that, as opposed to the fact that we couldn't undertake the full audit because of the previous disclaimed audit from EY. Value for money, we identified two significant weaknesses in respective arrangements that you had in place for securing efficiency, effectiveness, and in the use of your resources. So again, we'll come back to that later. On the next page, on page 13, page 5 of our report, again, generally nothing there that needs to be brought to your attention, nothing that we had to raise, apart from the recommendations in the middle column that are included in this report. And again, important for you to know about, make sure that they are being implemented, that they are being followed through, and that monitoring of the improvements that arise from the implementation of those recommendations are monitored and ensured are being delivered for the council. Move on to page 16 of your pack. These are the audit of the financial statements, and again, we've been through this at the last committee, happy to take questions. But in terms of the work that we undertook, it's there in the middle column, plus the work that we were unable to undertake for various reasons, which again were explained at the last committee. Valuation of investment property on the next page, same thing. Management of override of controls. These are all the significant risks that we identified as part of the audit, which is why they've been reported here again. Valuation of post-retirement benefits, again on page 11. The work that we were able to do, plus on the right-hand side, the identified findings, which we've picked up with management and are being considered as part of the 24-25 audit. Expenditure recognition, again, the work that we were able to do and the work that we were unable to perform in the middle column. And then the identified audit findings just on the right in terms of the transactions identified in capital expenditure, and there was no way to identify creditor transactions from accrual transactions. And again, part of the recommendations, part of the work that we're doing with the accountants now, flowing into 24-25. On page 13 of our report, page 21 of your report pack, the preparation of group accounts, and again, we've worked through this with the accountants. We're working through it for 24-25 and make sure that there are a better group set of accounts produced and more comprehensive. And again, in terms of opening balances, the fact that the 22-23 was disclaimed wholly by EY made it wholly impossible for us to undertake that work unless we did the whole audit again. So we were never going to do that. But we have been able to do the in-year transactions and get comfort over those, which gives us more comfort into 24-25. Recoverability and accuracy of investments. And again, we talked about this at the last committee. And again, we've identified the findings which are there on the right and made a number of recommendations in terms of how to improve that. On page 16 of our report, page 24 of your pack, the value for money work, just on the right-hand side, the table, a little summary table there. So identified two risks in terms of governance and improving the 3 E's. And in terms of the significant weaknesses, we identified significant weaknesses at year end in governance and the 3 E's. And again, talk you through those very briefly because it was covered at the last committee. So just taking you down to page 21 of our report, page 29 of the pack. Again, you can see there just highlighted the certain deficiencies in the various controls of self-authorization of control journals and the self-approval of non-PO invoices, which we talked about last time, plus the working in terms of the accounts control reconciliations and the key financial processes, which again form part of the 13 recommendations that we raised, which then led to a key the identification of a risk of significant weakness associated with this particular VFM criteria. And then on page 23 of our report, page 31 of your pack, again, we've talked about this previously, and this is one of the recommendations we've raised in terms of investment recoverability and why that resulted in a risk of significant weakness. The next pages take you through each of the recommendations in turn. And again, because we've raised these recommendations, these are something that the public will see. The public will want to know that you are implementing these and that their improvements are being pushed through and are delivering the improvements that you expect and we expect and the accountants expect. So again, all of that was reported at the last committee. Won't dwell on them unless there was any particular issue, but I'm happy to come back to that. The only other thing right at the end is the value for money prior year recommendation. There wasn't particularly a huge recommendation made by EY, but we include it there so that there is a comparator to prior year. The only other thing that I would raise, just again for total transparency and clear reporting to yourselves, is that we have raised a lot of additional fees. Those fees have been communicated with the directors of finance, Peter and Fazana, and been approved by them. All of those fees are still subject to PSAA evaluation and review. And whilst they are huge numbers, and I take no, we took no pleasure in having to undertake or issue those fee variations, but we had to undertake the additional work to make sure you were in the best place possible for the 23-24 audit and move us forward into 24-25. And I know members have asked, how do we make sure that that fee variation doesn't recur again? Part of that is making sure that those recommendations that we've raised are implemented fully and are delivered. And so the controls in place are better. The way that we are able to evidence the work from the work that you put together from your working papers is better, so we can carry out a much more efficient audit. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Cardoza. I'm going to open this up to questions from members, and we may then just kind of flow naturally into a discussion of this topic and questions to officers, etc. But does anybody want to start off with some questions? Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. It's just in relation, so obviously it's a big summary of what we've already had, so I don't imagine there's going to be too much. There's nothing that I can see that's glaringly different from what we've previously had. Obviously, I am concerned about the fees, Chair, because it is essentially dead money. It doesn't provide, other than some reassurance, it doesn't actually provide anything to our residents. So anything that can be done to evaluate that and bring that cost down would be very much appreciated by all, I'm sure. I just wanted to, actually sort of flowing on from our meeting last night, I'm aware that some audit firms are doing consultancy work in relation to local government reorganisation. I think KPMG may be doing some, I'm not sure, but I'm just wondering whether it affects, how it affects the going concern principles, because part of that is about, are there any major governing changes? And essentially, we are going to see the end of South Cambs as an entity. So just wondering whether there's been guidance or how that's going to affect auditors, because what I don't really want to see is then we end up having to pay, because more time is having to be put into the going concern principle, which at the end of the day we have absolutely no control over, and it very much has a nil impact from the accounting point of view.
Thank you.
To pick that up, Mr. Cardoza.
Sure. Yeah. So first and foremost, in terms of the fees, Councillor, absolutely agree, and we will make sure that part of the debrief with the accountants is going through exactly what we need and looking back at what we could have improved and what the accountants could improve, and making that audit as streamlined and as efficient as possible, but still being challenging and robust, which is exactly what you'd want anyway. Secondly, in terms of the local government reorganisation, our colleagues within consulting, within KPMG, are working with a number of bodies, but they will not work with any bodies where we are the external auditors or where our external audit, say yourselves, within Cambridgeshire, we won't do any work within that because of the potential conflict. In terms of going concern, good question. We're still waiting for final guidance. However, going concern within the public sector is less of a critical issue as it would be within a private company, because somebody will always have to provide the services that you are providing. So in terms of whether you as an organisation are a going concern, we place slightly less risk on that, because we know that ultimately the government, a body, will step in to provide the services to your residents, whether you can or you can't. In the past, where I think I mentioned this last time, I worked with Derbyshire County and Derbyshire City and all of the local government bodies within that, when they formed Derby City Council as a unitary, and then Derbyshire County as the kind of donut looking after the other bodies within Derbyshire. That worked quite well in terms of us making sure that we didn't increase our fees. It was about looking at how they were splitting the assets. But apart from that, that was the extent of the work that we had to do back then. Whether that's changed now, Councillor, we wait guidance just as you do, and it is a fast-changing world. And just similarly, on the NHS side, where we do 100 NHS bodies, and the NHSE going, again, people are asking us, are you going to have to do more work? Our answer at this moment in time is no. What it will create, and we will create within local government, are bigger bodies. And again, the efficiency there is fewer audits, but again, fewer auditors, because you will be massive organizations, and only certain firms will have the resources and dare I say it, skills to actually undertake that audit efficiently, challengingly, and robustly.
Thank you for those reflections. Any further comments or questions? Councillor Stobart.
So I have a question, and I'm referring to page 33 of the agenda pack 25 of the report. So we did talk about this a little last time, which was, and if I could phrase it in generic terms, the monitoring of a development, if you will, a project that the council through the investment partnership is investing in. And of course, naturally, if there's building work going on, there is always going to be that patch of uncertainty around where are we at. There are significant milestones like the granting of planning permission, but then there are grey patches where something's going on. There's a negotiation. Suppliers are being engaged, prices are being negotiated, and it could be. I think in that environment, it would be quite difficult to assess. Well, what is the real value of the investment? Of course, it becomes clearer as the project gets built out, but the Camborne development is just one of what potentially will be, and notwithstanding the fact that local government reorganisation will confuse the picture, of an increased involvement in building on the part of local authorities. So, first of all, is there good practice around monitoring in this kind of very complex environment? And can we use this as a prompt to get better? Perhaps we hand it over to a unitary in due course. But it seems as though there's learning to be done here and good practice to be adopted. What is that learning and what is that good practice?
Again, in terms of there is good practice out there, there is learnings that are easily available to local authorities to see how to better manage large projects and complex projects, to make sure that those milestones are adhered to. Again, in my past, when I worked with Northampton Borough Council and the football stadium debacle, as part of that, there were key things that we made recommendations on. Simple things. This is not rocket science. This is about managing a project, using good project management skills, using simple techniques which don't require a sophisticated approach to it. It just takes people who actually want to ensure that the best outcome is delivered, as opposed to the fastest outcome. And if we can work with yourselves to make sure that that's the case, then I'm sure we can get to a good place, which when you are in that position in a few years down the line, where you do have to hand this over to another organisation, the documentation is there, the monitoring is there in place, and the evidence is easily at hand. But happy to share that kind of information and those kind of improvements with with officers in due course.
Chair, through you, thank you for that. I think there are some action points implied in there, and I think the Camborne development probably provides an opportunity for, testing out some of the techniques that Mr. Cardoza has put forward.
Thank you. I think that's a useful contribution. Are there any further comments or questions on this report that councillors wish to raise? Yes, Councillor Redrup, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Leeming.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a question of clarification on page 16, the value for money findings summary. I just wasn't quite sure about the improving economy, efficiency and effective section. For one, it has the direction of travel as an upward arrow, which I'm not sure if that's correct. It looks like it may have worsened since 22-23.
Apology. Yeah, no, the upward arrow can be confusing. Sorry, it's just because it's an increase in the significant weakness.
Okay.
So I absolutely accept that, it's a worsening position, but it's an increase in the risk, and the weakness, which is why it's an upward arrow.
Okay, thank you. Also, was it a risk of significant weakness and a significant weakness identified, or just a risk of significant weakness? Like reading through the subsequent commentaries, I couldn't find where it says it's an actual significant weakness, only a risk. So I just wanted to check on that. Thank you.
The wording is that it's a risk of significant weakness. So, and at the end of the year, it's a conclusion that it is a significant weakness, Councillor.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Leeming?
Thank you, Chair, through you. So I'm looking at page 37 of our report, page 29 of the KPMG report. Recommendation 6, monitoring of investments. And I've read the audit recommendation and the management response, and there seems to be a disagreement between our statement and the recommendation, and I wondered whether you could expand a bit more about what the difference of opinion is, please.
Well, I can only explain our position, Councillor, that, and then if officers want to step in, I'm absolutely happy for that. So our position was that there should be a formal register and a formal documentation of all your assets and liabilities, so that they're brought into one place. And this is something that we discussed across KPMG with senior partners and risk partners when we were raising this, because this is one of the things that we were raising as part of our opinion as well. So this was a key thing for us in terms of how do you know what are all the assets and what are all the liabilities that you have? Because when we were asking the question, not all of that documentation was readily to hand. So yes, it was from our point of view, it was a fairly simple recommendation to make. It's not a simple thing for the council to deliver because of the missing information or the information that's harder to bring together. But again, something that we will continue to work with officers, regardless of whether they agree with it or not, because we will still need that evidence when we ask for it. So whether, Peter, whether you want to pick that up. Sorry, I can't hear.
Yeah, sorry, I'd forgotten to wave my card.
No worries.
So we did have a bit of a discussion about this, and certainly our feeling was that it wouldn't actually add anything, but I do think it's worth exploring this further. So I know we've got to catch up fairly soon. I can't remember the date. So I wouldn't actually mind picking it up in that and exploring this a bit further, because whilst our initial assessment was that it doesn't, we didn't believe it added any benefit, I think it's worth exploring further just to make sure that we understand fully what it is, and make sure that we are happy with what we're saying. But okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think I'll come back to you in a moment, Councillor. I think my concerns would be, first of all, if we don't have something in place which is what what KPMG are expecting to see, then we're just going to run into issues again in the next audit, and it's going to be, not only will this be a recommendation again, but there'll be kind of additional time and kind of cost overruns kind of baked into that. I also just wonder, obviously we can't now stop thinking about local government reorganisation, and it won't now leave our brains for the next, well, probably 5 years if we're being realistic. And in that context, I think a deep and accurate understanding of the assets and liabilities of the council is going to be more important over the next sort of 12 to 24 months, probably than it ever has been before, if those are going to be involved in some kind of great structural change. Is that a fair kind of guess, do we think?
So it is interesting that you raise that, because we had the discussion about the sort of data that we need to pull together for local government review. And actually something like this, probably would assist that. And given that I think we're going to have to do something along those lines, it may be now that, as a result of our discussion, we may decide that, it covers two bases. So it covers this and indeed covers local government reviews. So, yeah, so we'll have a discussion about it and form a view. But certainly it's pretty clear that there's a lot of data that's going to need to be looked at, analysed in relation to local government review, and our assets and liabilities will be part of that.
Thank you. Sorry to intervene. Councillor Leeming, did you have any further comments or questions?
I did, thank you, Chair. It was just that when do you have this meeting, please? And could we receive an update on the decision that you reach in that meeting? I think that would be very useful, because for a number of reasons, it's an audit recommendation that, as Councillor Atkins says, will repeat if not dealt with. And I do agree, it's crucial to understand this, particularly in the light of local government reorganisation and consolidation in future. So yes, it would be very helpful for us to get an update on the updated response to this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, sorry, Chair. Just in terms of when is the meeting is within the next month, within April, and yes, we will report back to members in terms of the outcome of that debrief and ongoing kind of planning into 24-25. Sorry to interrupt.
No, thank you. That's helpful. We may consider whether it may be appropriate for some members of the committee to attend some or part of that meeting as well, just to ensure that we've got that link back to the committee, as well as obviously updating all members. Either by circulation or at the next meeting. Thank you for your Councillor Stobart.
Chair, thank you. So this may be a minor point, but page 38 of the pack and on page 30 of the audit report, register of interest for senior officers. So I think the statement is quite clear. There is, at least in outline, a register of interest, but it's not filled in. And the response is a little tortuous. I'm just wondering what's going on here. And it's not really a question to Mr. Cardoza rather than the senior officers of South Cambridgeshire District Council. Why isn't this happening?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Stobart. Yes, I was a little struck by two mutually conflicting sentences presented on one page to us, which doesn't often happen as councillors. Do we have Mr. Murphy online at the moment?
He's not here at the moment, no.
But he will be presumably rejoining for the next item. Okay. It may be that we take this up with. I mean, I'll see if Mr. Maddock wants to make any comment, but I know Mr. Murphy is intending to join us later in the meeting. And may be able to give some further information. But yes, I suppose the basic question is: does the council maintain a detailed register of interest for senior officers, or doesn't it?
The answer is that it does. We've certainly improved in that area. Interestingly, we were discussing this yesterday at leadership team. I think John Murphy will have a better idea than me, and I know he's going to be joining for the next item. We may have to, if he's not able to, we may have to come back with a written response, if that's okay. But I certainly know we've made some improvements since last year, because I think it was a valid comment.
Thank you. So should we understand this as that there has always been a register of interest, however it had kind of weaknesses in how it was structured and how it was monitored, and that has subsequently been tightened up? Is that Mr. Cardezza, does that match what you have found?
Yes, yes, it is a case of being much more comprehensive and monitored and kept up to date and fully updated. I think, as Peter said, there has been improvements. We, in terms of the recommendation, is we try to keep the recommendations as straightforward, as simple as possible. So the formal detail register of interest, etc., that's maintained is basically what we're looking for, but a comprehensive one. And I think the final couple of sentences on the right-hand side from management, in terms of whilst the related party declarations only apply to specific officers, we want it to be for any officers, really, because again, in terms of where does that touch, where does that impact, where could a potential conflict, as long as everyone's declaring everything, it's much easier to make sure that there isn't a conflict.
Forgive me, I might need you to explain that to me again.
So at the
moment, so you're saying at the moment the council only collects related party declarations for specific officers, by which we might assume senior officers and those in a position of management, but it does not collect them across all officers. And that is a
so whether it,
and your recommendation would be that it should.
Yeah.
Okay. Has the senior leadership team taken a view on that, Mr. Maddock?
Andrew's right. Yeah, we have only been seeking declarations from particular officers, and I tend to agree. I mean, there may be an officer sitting somewhere in one of the departments that's not senior that has got an interest they need to register. So I think it's something we need to look at, and we'll need to see how we're going to do this, because obviously we need to try and catch everyone. So it could significantly increase the workload, but equally, there's always a chance that there's some declaration we haven't picked up because it's not on the people we would normally contact.
Is there? Thank you. Is there? I'll come, Mr. Murphy. I might bring you in just a moment, but perhaps Mr. Cardezza and Mr. Maddock. Is there a threshold we could draw that's more comprehensive than the one we have now, but wouldn't have to be absolutely every single employee of the entire council? I wonder if we're...
Yeah, that would make sense, because again, not every employee would have a decision-making ability to direct spend. So maybe that would be the key thing, Chair. Yeah, happy to work with officers on that.
Thank you. Mr. Tully.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think there's something pragmatic about having an effective system which is easy to manage. But I mean, what I would say, there's sort of like reporting by exception as well as reporting nil concerns. And that's where you get the difference in how practical it is to manage. What we do have, and what I have seen, is there has been communication reminders to all staff in the council about their responsibility to sort of declare interests. And in addition to that, we do sort of like testing periodically in various different areas like procurement and things like that. The National Fraud Initiative looks at where there's been potential conflicts. So there are detective controls as well. Yeah, if that's any sort of reassurance for the committee.
Thank you. Mr. Murphy, thank you for rejoining us slightly earlier, perhaps, than the item you were expecting to be drawn in on. We're looking at the in KPMG's audit recommendations. One of them is around this register of interest for senior officers and the comprehensiveness of it. I wonder, perhaps, can you update the committee on perhaps what changes have been made to this register over, say, the last 6 months in terms of how it operates? What scope you might see for kind of how it might change in the future.
Thank you, Chair, and just want to apologise to you, Chair, and to everyone for my late joining earlier than the item that I was expecting to speak on. So apologies if I've missed everything part of the 60 seconds that I've just logged in for. But I'm sure if my colleagues haven't already said so, what we have done is that we have improved the system. We have worked with IT to ensure that we now have a more positively engaging form to fill in. So in simple terms, rather than just leaving it blank if it's a no, we have people who have to positively choose no, and you positively choose yes. So that's a step forward. It removes that ambiguity of, did someone fail to really read the form? We can see that they've positively chosen yes or no. Further, excuse me, sorry. We have sent round an all staff email with our new form some months ago, January. So that's this financial year 24-25. And the new system works that the reports are captured. So we do have statistics, and I know that we've got, as of a number of weeks ago, as of 3 weeks ago, we had over 30 members who have positively said, yes, I am senior, it is relevant to me, I will make a declaration. We only discussed this in the leadership team yesterday, and I was to send out, and I will be sending out another reminder tomorrow morning to ensure that I've got at least 2 emails and reminders to staff in this year to fill in the new form, which requires positive engagement. So I am mindful that in the past it was done differently. All I can say to you, Chair, is that leadership team are aware of that, and we have improved the system requiring positive engagement from staff. And for what it's worth, I'm trying to make sure I've got 2 reminders sent out in this year, so that when we come for the audit this time next year, the stats are you can have a lot more faith in them, that they are capturing true declarations from key staff, and it is something that we are on top of and mindful of.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. That's helpful update. Mr. Freeman, did you want to come in on this point, or is it?
Yes, please.
Yes, please do then.
So I just wanted to point to Section 117 of the Local Government Act and just make sure that what is being said here is actually compliant with that, which talks about officers, doesn't relate to senior officers, and it relates to having an interest directly or indirectly in a contract, and the requirement to register that and the failure to do that being a criminal offence. So I just wanted to double check that what we're talking about here with this register of interests would satisfy the requirements of that provision of the Act.
Thank you. Does anybody want to take an initial stab at that, or does?
Chair, may I?
Yes, please do, Mr. Murphy.
Certainly, you'll forgive me, but if the question is just trying to seek reassurance that between the phrase all staff and senior staff, my reminders are to all staff that if they have declarations, they should fill in the form. My position is I'm expecting senior staff and key staff to do it every year anyway. And that would be an example where somebody positively chooses, no, I've got nothing to say, but I'm a senior member of staff, but every year I will make that declaration. But my position, my communication, my expectation is that I inform all staff. So even if they are, how do I phrase this politely, a member of staff doing a lower ranked job in the organisation, if they happen to have a declaration that is sufficient to be declared, I would expect them to do that. But I would look to senior staff to do it every year, regardless of whether they say yes or no.
Thank you. Does that answer your question?
I think it does in part, Chair. So I think the issue we have to say is, with the communication that's going out to staff, are they given the right information to know what is declarable? Hopefully, yes, and it sounds like the revision of the form will do that. Secondly, that failure to do it isn't just a matter of an internal disciplinary matter, but actually a specific offence in law. And so they need to be aware of the consequences of not doing so, and perhaps reminded of that, so there is a deterrent effect for avoiding that failure. So just being aware of that act itself.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Councillor Williams and Howell, is this on the same point? Thank you. I'll take you in that order then.
Thank you, Chair. So on the part in the report, I can understand where auditors are coming from about all staff, because I think there can be an assumption that we're just looking at financial when we talk about conflicts of interest, but actually, if you are a planning officer and you also work with a developer, that is a conflict, and it could be a huge conflict in the way things are run. Equally, it doesn't really matter where you're ranked or graded in the organisation, even if somebody, they have access to this building. That in itself is a risk if there's a conflict of interest. So there is information that is available. You can walk past somebody's desk and see something. All these things, and so I'm very uncomfortable with the sort of suggestion that we register or we hold a register for senior, because then again you have to get into the definition of where do you draw the line where senior is. And to be honest, I'm not entirely, we have labelled senior leadership team, but I would argue actually the senior members of the organisation are not just the senior leadership team. We've then heard the word key members, so I'm assuming that's people that are involved in procurement or fraud and what have you. But we also know that we have a significant amount of staff that are working more than one job, and that we didn't know people were working prior to recent times. So the fact that that was happening and we weren't aware, in my view, is a risk. And actually, as has been said, is it being made clear to people what they need to actually register and whatnot? And I appreciate it could be some admin, extra admin, but at the end of the day, if we're asking people, we're asking all staff whether they've got an interest or not, that information has to go somewhere. So if we're acting when people say it, I don't see that it's a huge drain to then have a register for everybody. And I think actually when we're looking at people in the housing department dealing with things, we know from a fraud point of view, I'm not saying that any of our officers do anything wrong, but I am uncomfortable with separating out. We'll keep a register for some, and then others it's not optional, but we'll remind them, but we're not taking the same. We're creating a two-tier system within the authority, and I don't think that's good governance. So I understand why officers are saying what they have, and I do appreciate there's been improvements, and I appreciate you're reaching out to all staff. However, I feel much more comfortable with the recommendations from KPMG. And also, I think perhaps we ought to review this another time and actually see what the communication plan is. Because when I chaired a task and finish group that we were running, it wasn't just about actually the practicalities and the procedures. We were looking at whistleblowing, things like that. It's how it's advertised. Because you can have the best policies, you can have the best forms that you like, but unless you are communicating it right, unless you are advertising it to member staff, you're not actually going to get what you seek. So, for example, we see lots of things about safeguarding on the notice boards, and everything else. I don't think I've seen anything on register of interest. I've not actively been looking, but is it visible in the building? Is it on Insight? Is it a flagship thing? Because actually, as was said, it is a criminal offence.
Thank you. Councillor Howell, I'll take your comment and then I might come back to officers in a moment.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, with regards to staff, what I would be very concerned about is any member of staff who doesn't declare interest on any report that they have input into, whether that is the actual writing of the report or the checking of the report. Now, so would that mean at the beginning of the particular meeting that the member of staff stands up and says, yes, I have many shares in KPMG or whoever they may be, or does it just mean at the end of the report we have there that it's been ticked off and it just says no conflict of interest, no conflict of interest? That would be my concern here. Now, whether or not that members of staff's declaration of interest should be made public, I don't think so. I think that we're the elected members, ours should be made public. I think elected people, even only a few elected people maybe should have access to their member staff, but I do not think that their member staff should be made public. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howell. I will come to you in a moment, Mr. Murphy, but I wonder, I think the view of the committee seems to be that I think we probably welcome the improvements that have been made to this process over the last couple of months. However, it feels like there's still some distance to go. and there are, I think, quite reasonable concerns about are we truly kind of protecting our members of staff against the possibility of kind of inadvertently committing some kind of criminal offence. I wonder, Mr. Tully, not to throw this at you, but to do precisely that, whether you or a member of your team could come back to the next meeting of this committee. Perhaps you could review the communication and the work that's been done to date. Perhaps seek some, perhaps cross-reference again to the kind of primary legislation that governs this, and perhaps give us a measure of assurance as to whether the process that we've got now is protecting both the council and members of staff to the full extent that it could, or actually, given the seriousness of the situation and the concerns of the committee, whether we need to take further steps. Does that sound like a reasonable way forward on this?
Yes, that's a fine, reasonable response. We'll try and get something for the
Thank you.
next committee.
Mr. Murphy, are you happy to work with Mr. Tully on this, and any further comments from yourself, of course?
Always happy to work with Mr. Tully, but no, that's fine. We can work together and bring something back.
Thank you. I really haven't given you much choice about that, but I'm glad you want to do it anyway. Thank you. Are there any further comments on this matter? No, thank you. That was a very useful discussion. Thank you all. Councillor Stowell.
Chair,
Chair,
Murphy, yes. If I may, I know you're keen to move on to the next item, but just picking up on one or two comments that I did here, I just thought it's worth flagging up. I think Councillor Williams talked about me using key staff and leadership team. I've approached this with a degree of proportionality or realism. If at one extreme, I sent out communications that said all staff, all employees must complete the form. Well, if I have somebody I'll just pick this at random, but a member of the Fleet and Waste Department who refused, the logical next step is that's potentially a disciplinary matter. And that takes us down to a whole area where we might have huge resources focused on numbers of people who just refuse to put in a declaration. The way I have pitched it is I've asked all staff to reflect, because I don't know what they do in their spare time. I've asked all staff, the duty is on them. However, for the key staff, which includes senior leadership team, Councillor Williams said that's something that we choose to describe people, yes, but there are other specific teams where I'm looking for them to make an annual declaration, like the procurement team, for example, even though they might say nothing. So I do think, I hear what Councillor Williams said, but I think we're adding a degree of realism and proportionality, but at the same time making clear duties on people. But there are certain people, subsets, that I expect to give me an annual response in any event. I just think I think that's a realistic pitch. But of course, working with Mr. Tully, if members think that's not the case, we'll adapt. But that's how we've started off, and I think we are in a much better place than where we were when I inherited this role and the figures that we've looked at in retrospect.
Thank you. Councillor Williams, you indicated you wish to speak.
Thank you. And as we've said, we recognise there is improvements to the process. However, one thing I will say, if somebody is refusing to fill out a form to tell us whether they have an interest or not, and they're refusing to do that, that is a red flag in itself. And I have no issues at all with people being told that this is a mandatory form, because they should be doing it. If they have a conflict and they don't tell us, it's a criminal offence. So I would not hold back on the fear that people would refuse to fill in a form. I think it should be mandatory. It's necessary for governance to protect themselves as well, to make sure they are fully informed. But if somebody said to me, I'm refusing to tell you where my interests are, that would be a red flag in itself.
Thank you. I'm sure Mr. Tully and Mr. Murphy will reflect on all the comments that the committee has made, and I think we've made our views on this pretty well known, so thank you. Councillor Stowbart, it was your original question that prompted this very helpful discussion. Did you have anything else you want to say on this or any other matter?
I expected it to expand as it did, but I think it's been very healthy, and I think there are some useful actions coming out.
Thank you. Is there anything else members wanted to discuss on this report? I don't want to cut short any discussion of anything else useful. Particularly, we have other exciting things to talk about today as well. Thank you. Well, we've been asked to note this report. I think we've done that in some detail. Thank you very much, Mr. Cardoza, for joining us online. We look forward to seeing you again soon. And thank you to you and your team for the work they've been doing on our audit over the last couple of months. Thank you. We move on to agenda item 6, which is the policy and update on use of RIPA powers. We've got Mr. Murphy staying with us to present this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's a very short report. I think the key highlights are that the policy itself is not fundamentally changed. It has been helpfully rewritten in small areas to make it more readable. And I'd like to thank one of the colleagues in the audit team for doing that. As for its use this year, it continues to be the case that South Cambs has not availed itself of the RIPA powers. What has happened this year is that a number of identified staff have undertaken RIPA training, so the level of knowledge of RIPA and what it could do to benefit South Cambs has now been spread wider within key targeted officers, and I think that's going to pay dividends, because my understanding is that certainly the fraud team and the leadership of the fraud team are looking at using RIPA in the current climate and moving forward to better enable themselves to identify, detect, and take prosecutions where necessary. I don't know if any colleagues would like to speak in a bit more detail about that, but they're the key highlights that I would present to this committee. Otherwise, the fundamentals are the policy remains good, it's been reviewed, and we present it again. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm recalling when we looked at this last 12 months ago, there was some confusion around the naming of officers, you know, who was the senior responsible officer, who was this officer, who was that officer. It looks to me like that's all now been tidied up. Is that your understanding as well?
That is correct. There is a slight change to the officers nominated at the end of the policy itself, and those names are good, true, and yes, we did go back and revisit that and looked again at it.
Thank you for that reassurance. Before we move on, I mean, it would be interesting to hear perhaps how this policy might be deployed in the coming months. But before we do that, are there any questions about the policy or use of historical RIPA? I'll take Councillor Williams, then Mr. Freeman, then Councillor Stobart.
Thank you. I'm not suggesting that RIPA powers should be used lightly, but what I would say is it's been nil for quite some time. And when I compare that to sort of back in sort of 2018 to 2020, we didn't have a lot, but there was occasions. And I'm always a bit nervous if things are 0% or 100%. Like, because is it that it's not being used because we traditionally used it if we had fly tipping hotspots. It was very useful, apart from when they stole the cameras, that was not so good. But so we know that we have fly tipping problems, and you know, at the moment in my patch it's more than probably has been for the last 3 years. So we do still have these hotspots. Why are we not using the powers? I think is something, because it's been nil for a very long time now, that we, not today, but if officers could come back to us over, or perhaps an email circulated to Audit might be more appropriate given the nature of what these powers are used for. But it's sort of looking like inaction rather than we've not got a problem. Might not be the case, but just want to rule that out.
Thank you. I'll move on to Mr. Freeman, if I may.
Thank you. And to pick up on Councillor Williams's points as well. So the policy itself mentions the report to this committee being quarterly, but it does talk about all surveillance activity, not just that's authorised under the Act. So I would like to draw that distinction and just to ask that actually in future the reports include activity that constitutes surveillance but not authorised under RIPA, because that may well be the activity that we're referring to. The second thing I would say as well is there is, as I mentioned, there's occasions where activity that constitutes surveillance be undertaken, but it's not, it cannot be authorised under RIPA. So where it's an investigation, it's not a criminal investigation, for example, RIPA does not allow you to conduct directed surveillance, but you may still wish to do surveillance, and there's a whole process set out in the policy which explains how we go about that. What I would caution, though, is the council also needs to ensure that there are steps in place to recognise when there is activity that's happening that should be subject to authorisation. So the examples are given in there about observing or visiting properties repeatedly to get a pattern of behaviour. It may not fall within the realms of RIPA, but it may do. So identifying actually is there activity that goes on as a part of business as usual that possibly should be considered as surveillance. And the other one is covert human intelligence sources, the same sort of thing, our interaction with residents. Are we ensuring that the protections of RIPA are used when they should be used for when things actually step into the realm of covert or covert human intelligence sources in particular?
Thank you. I'll just take Councillor Stobart's comment questions, and I might come back to you, Mr. Murphy.
Chair, thank you. We heard that even in this period of relatively light usage of surveillance, training has continued. That's to be welcomed. I'm just wondering, is technology associated with this? Are we keeping up to date with technology? And are the staff involved, in a sense, ready to act? They may be trained, but have they run through some scenarios together? Can they work together effectively? These are the kind of things which you might call an operational readiness. You might well come back to me and say, well, that's not necessary here. But I would like just a reassurance that there's that kind of operational readiness. And then to some of the points that have just been made by Mr. Freeman and Councillor Williams, there's a kind of data gathering going on here. And does it in some way overlap? Could it be considered as part of our general data gathering, or does it need to be kept quite distinct because of the nature of what the information we're collecting? So are there some synergies that could be exploited? Yeah, there are my questions.
Thank you, Councillor Stobart. Mr. Murphy, can I come back to you on those points?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Fully transparent, I'm not over all the operational detail of the day-to-day frontline activity, so I apologise, but just picking up the points that have been made. Councillor Williams mentioned, in summary, no activity can be, there's no need for it, or people aren't using it. I think that's a valid point. All I can say is, having spoken to particularly I know the fraud team are very keen. They were very keen to be upskilled in the training this year, and I am expecting them to be making more of the opportunities now that they have a wider knowledge level of what they can and can't do under RIPA. But I think Councillor Williams makes a valid point, and that's something that perhaps officers we can look into and come back on. Mr. Freeman made a number of quite detailed points, I think, and I agree with you. I'm very mindful that when I did my training in reading, what struck me was that there may be officers who are looking on a member of the public's Facebook page sometimes to have a look at what they're up to if this is somebody they're engaged with a regulatory dispute. And I know there is some guidance that to do it once is normal, but if you were to do it again and again, that almost puts you into RIPA coverage activity. So all I can say is that I hope that with the training that we have and the widened education that we have with officers about RIPA, there is more knowledge about what we can and can't doing. And I hope that next year's report and in fact my ongoing report to this committee will be enhanced, because there'll be more nuance to what we're doing and what we're not doing, because we know we can do more. And as for the final point, Councillor Stobart, I'm afraid I'll have to ask officers to better inform me as to how we're handling and managing that data, but that's something that obviously there's going to be more of, because I imagine we will be doing more under our RIPA powers now.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I can well believe that as we start to use it more and more kind of purposefully, that other activities that maybe have been in some kind of sort of slightly grey zone will be looked at again as we kind of gain more experience of using it formally. Yes, Ms. Nubbin-King?
Good morning. I think I can answer some of the questions that have been raised. I can't speak on behalf of enforcement or anything like that, but in terms of fraud's uses of the power, you'll be familiar that you have to have it has to be a particular level of seriousness to be able to utilise the power. So you're looking at anything that's got 6 months sentencing guidelines as imprisonable. So when we were focused around initially looking at things like council tax support, it wasn't deemed to be falling within that kind of category according to sentencing guidelines. And we were quite focused around that for a while. And then we started to expand the types of investigations that we were looking at to look at things like prevention of social housing, which would meet the threshold. And then as the corporate team has grown, the kind of investigation or referrals that we're receiving actually do fall beyond those things that fall within council tax and prevention of housing. So we've had instances where we know we've been targeted potentially, and we can use the Fraud Act, etc., as a response to that. Did you have a question now, or do you want me to continue? Okay, fine. Also, in terms of capacity, over as we've built the team, we've worked at building the team so that we have got investigators that can respond to some of this. And I think it's fair to say that up until this point, we had fewer investigators than we do now, and all from different varying backgrounds, all qualified, etc. But what we've got at the moment is we're in a position where we've obviously restructured the team. So we've got that kind of reactive investigative side of it, and we've got that sort of data intelligence and prevention side of it. And so that's been able to focus people. And our seniors now that are in place do come from a background of experience from previous careers in different public organisations. And so I think we're at a point now where we're ready to be able to use the powers just in terms of the capacity and the cases that we're looking at, but also we do have the relevant background in those officers that are overseeing the use of them as well, and being able operationally to provide advice and support to the people that will be using them. So if that helps at all from our point of view, obviously having an update so that we can comply with the inspectorate was something that was quite important. And so what's been attached to the training that the corporate fraud team or have actually undertaken is assessment at the end of it, so that where they're making an application or anybody that's authorising an application will actually go through an assessment process around, you know, their capability to be able to produce that record so that it withstands scrutiny. So that's our position at the moment, but I can't speak for anybody else that might be using the powers or intending to. I hope that helps in some way.
Thank you. That was indeed very helpful. Now, I think Councillor Howell, you indicated, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. Just 2 points. One, it's more of a warning to the committee, as much as you might want to go into the management and what actually happens with regards to these this topic. I think we should keep the policy and nothing else. If we want to know some of the more intricate detail, then we should take that out of offline at least and have a conversation with the officers if that's possible. And can I remind the officers that you have CCTV in there, but unless you're SIA CCTV qualified, you're not allowed to use that evidence with regards to passing on to the police or any court of law. That you have to be a qualified CCTV person. More information would be gained by our colleagues in Huntingdon District Council, who run a very comprehensive CCTV programme. Thank you.
Thank you for that contribution. Councillor Williams.
Thank you. It was just on something that John Murphy referenced in relation to sort of looking through Facebook and things like that. And I'm just wondering, sort of, there must be sort of criteria as to when it becomes it. So, for example, the comms team here, you know, they follow councillors on social media. I know officers look at my social media often, and I'm sure they do other councillors as well. I wouldn't class that as surveillance of me, but from what you said, it sort of described almost as if, because someone's following the social media or going through my social media, that that's them surveilling me. So I wonder as well, it sounds like there's great training going on. I'm wondering whether it would be good for councillors to look at some sort of briefing on this across the board, because as has been pointed out, actually quite often local members, councillors will be asked for local knowledge, or I know I've been asked, can you go have a look, or can you go take some photos, or can you do this, that and the other to support officers, because we're nearer, saves them a trip or what have you. So I think perhaps a bit of training and guidance for councillors, not just on audit, but across the board would be useful, and to make sure that things like the comms teams aren't being sort of restricted. But yes, I know of some officers that very closely follow councillor social media.
Thank you. Yes. Can we arrange some form of suitable training, do we think, or some kind of more? I mean, I don't think we want to. Oh, sorry. Was that been King?
Okay, so we've got a briefing, if you like, that's already prepared around RIPA. Okay, just to give some insight to that. I think that, you know, whether it falls, what you're describing falls within that definition of a directed surveillance, I'm sure that it's more, I'm not convinced that that does. I think that we've also prepared it, and we can deliver it at any time that you want, but we'll also be delivering it across our drop-in sessions, because what we do have a tendency is that you might get officers that are curious, that are working in particular departments or particular sections, and may think, you know, it's quite harmless to refer and return back to somebody's social media, and actually it does turn into monitoring, and they are collecting personal information about that person. They don't realise they're doing it. So that's going to be one of the drop-in sessions, and what we will continue to do is all of the pieces of training that we've developed, we will keep circulating, because we can't get out to everybody. Obviously we can't get everybody to join at the same time, but that's all prepared and ready to go.
So Chair, can we propose that it's arranged for all members, because I think, yeah, that would be very helpful, and perhaps if John can just elaborate more what he was saying about, because you said you go through someone's Facebook once, that's curiosity, you start going through it more, just how that works for some of our colleagues on the comms side.
Chair, I'm sure we can work in with, I mean, as you can see, Tara's all across the detail on this, but Chair, this is certainly something that officers can go away and we can talk to members and see if we can put something out and build a programme to train or just be more transparent to members.
Thank you, that would be appreciated. Are there any further comments or questions on this report? Good, so we are being asked to approve the Council's RIPA policy. Can we do that by affirmation, please? Thank you, and note that the Council has not used surveillance powers in the last, between March 2024 and February 2025, which we have done so. Thank you very much, Mr. Murphy, for presenting the report. Agenda item 7 is the strategic risk report. Would members like to take a very short comfort break at this moment, or would you like to crack on a bit more first? I'm seeing a desire for a short comfort break. Let's come back at 11:20 and resume at that point. So I'll adjourn the meeting for 7 minutes. Thank you. Thank you. We're now restarting the Audit and Corporate Governance meeting. We're on agenda item 7, which is the 6-monthly Strategic Risk Report update. I believe we're joined online by Mr. Ledger to present this report. I'm hoping he may have been foxed by us taking a break. No?
No, thank you, Chair. My Teams connection just seemed to take a while to come off mute there. Yeah, thank you, everyone. So this is the strategic risk report that comes to Audit and Corporate Governance Committee on a 6-monthly basis. The report provides an update in relation to risk monitoring and management activity that has taken place since the previous review audit committee, which was in September, as well as providing a copy of the strategic risk log at Appendix A, which is pages 83 through to 86 of your agenda packs. A summary of the changes to the risk log that have taken place since September's review has also been included at Appendix B, so that's at pages 87 and 88 of your agenda packs. It's worth me saying that as part of the strategic risk review arrangements, any comments or suggestions that come up or come forward from Audit and Corporate Governance Committee will be fed back to leadership team, and they'll then go on to consider those as part of the ongoing review of the risk log. That's really everything that I wanted to cover, just to outline the purpose of the report. So I'll pass back to Chair, and we'll be happy to take any comments or questions that committee members have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ledger. Yes, and thank you for the report. I thought it was very helpful to have both the full report and the changes since last time. It's a really useful presentation for us, so thank you. Are there any comments or questions to Mr. Ledger? Obviously, his ability to answer questions about what's going on in every single directorate of the council may be slightly limited, but nevertheless, he can feed back as necessary to senior leadership if he doesn't have the answer at his fingertips. So, I believe Councillor Stobart, you indicated you'd like to come in.
Thank you. Chair, I'd just like to echo your comments about the well, I'd just like to add that the clarity of the report. Now, it's fine print because there's an awful lot on a page, but I think the presentation, the categories, very helpful. The explanation is very supportive, and the change log, I think, also helps. It makes for a nice, complete set of stuff. I would like to comment more on the nature of risks and in a sense what this is telling us. There's one new risk being added and none removed. So I'm interested in what that says about our environment. Now, you would say qualitatively we feel as though the environment in which the council operates is becoming more risky, and we would expect to be adding risks, but there has to be a limit. You know, we're looking at something which is reviewed by the senior leadership team from time to time. Are we seeing risks being managed down, and therefore are there some that we could conceivably take off the list? Because in the end, you know, too long a list becomes unwieldy and difficult to manage. So that's my first question. Are we considering the life of the risk register and taking things off? The second, and perhaps I have several points, but the second, and I'll stop there for an answer, is the risks are quite general. So if I could just pick out one example and explain myself. I'll pick one out. So SR15 is on the first page, and it is Peter's. The condition, the risk itself is quite nuanced. Sorry, I'm leaping ahead of myself. The risk itself is quite general, and there are more nuanced kind of, if you will, views of the risk. So non-compliance with council housing legislation. What triggers that? Is that new government legislation? Is that what? And I think if we were to look at a risk and not really understand how that risk is triggered, then how is the leadership team kind of approaching it, and how is their accountability built in if there isn't that, if you will, trigger to recognising the risk which is actually at a level we need to deal with it. So, sorry, that's a bit of a ramble, but I hope I'm conveying the meaning there.
No, thank you, Councillor Stober. I'm not sure I quite heard you correctly at the start, but I think 3 risks have been added and none removed, which I think makes your point very strongly about the kind of usability of this document. Yes, Mr. Ledger, what's your view on how do we make sure this document stays a kind of useful and living and kind of focused document and doesn't kind of sprawl?
I think it's a good challenge. I'll just point out that we have removed one, and that's kind of apologies on my behalf in that it was an oversight from me in terms of not including the details of that removal in Appendix A, but that's just at paragraph 5 of the covering report. SR 30, 4-day week being stopped by government or financial penalties are imposed that force us to the council to return to the 5-day week has been removed. So there was one removal, but in future I'll make sure that any removals are logged in the change log as well. But I still think that the point stands around making sure that the strategic risk log remains kind of manageable and doesn't grow indefinitely. One thing that I would say is that I feel like we have been providing refreshed and additional focus on the management of strategic risks over the last year and a half. So I think that it's fairly natural that there would be a period whereby actually kind of additional risks that perhaps hadn't been captured before are added to the risk log. But equally, I do think that you're right. Over time, we should be making sure and putting that challenge forward that perhaps there might be some things that no longer warrant being included on the strategic risk log. And certainly what I can do personally is next time I'm having a conversation with leadership team about the strategic risk log, I'll make sure that that's something that is conveyed to them is Audit and Corporate Governance Committee's view of the importance of making sure that we are kind of taking things off where that is the right thing to be doing. So that's kind of what I'd say in relation to the first question. If I could just give a quick response in relation to the second question about some of the risks being quite general. Again, I think that that's a really good challenge, and certainly that example, it would be useful to have some more detail around kind of what could trigger that particular risk event occurring. So that's certainly something that I'll take away. However, more generally, what I might say is that there are also additional service risk registers that sit below the strategic risk register, and so in some instances it might be that actually there's quite a relatively general risk kind of at the strategic level, but then there's kind of more detailed and nuanced risks that do sit below that. That aren't included in the strategic register, but that are being managed at the service level. However, I still think that the example that you gave is a good one, and certainly that's something that I will feed back.
Thank you. Councillor Howell, I believe you indicated.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, with regards to the risks that we got here, I'm looking specifically with regards to the ones on housing and the increase of bed and breakfast. Now, South Cambs used to, and things change over the years, be extremely good on this, and we had in 1 year only one night in a bed and breakfast because all the others we managed to do. So it's unfortunate to see that that is still quite high at 15 points. Coming down, mind, however, slightly with regards to the dampness and the new law, and I'm now quite sure how to pronounce it. Is it AWAB's law? I'm not quite, is that correct? Yeah, we know what I'm talking about.
I mean, that particular measure there is also due to a lifestyle choice with regards to many people and condensation. So I think it's also working with people as well with regards to what's happening, but at the same time, we have to take responsibility for some of the other things that take place, especially with regards to mold and dampness. So I'd just like a little bit more information to say on that one, because that can have a direct effect on people's health, as can the homelessness one. If there's anything more that has been done that is not written down in this particular report. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ledger, is there anything you want to say in response to that? It may just be to take that back and maybe seek some further detail on those particular lines.
I think probably my colleagues in the housing team would be better placed to give that additional detail. So certainly that's something that I can take away and request from them, if that's okay with you.
Chairman, can I ask if I can go to all members of the audit panel, please?
Yes, thank you. If we can make sure that yeah, that's included in the next version of this and an updated version circulated, that would be good. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to the housing, and I have raised this with officers, but I think it should be factored into the risks as well, is what is sort of given as an emergency. And I've had 2 incidences now where what Mears has said is not an emergency is definitely what we would consider an emergency. So I think it is a risk in that interpretation of the word for the emergency repairs. And I'm wondering if that's something that can be worked on. I give the 2 examples, both of which have been from residents of ours in council properties that are in their 90s, okay? So already in a more vulnerable position to be able to do things themselves. One of which was just before Christmas, the heating, the radiators went, and Mears did not consider heating an emergency in winter, which is, I'm sure we would take a very different view. The other was a few weeks ago, and these people had wastewater coming up through their sink. Again, they were told it's not an emergency, but and that actually they could do that themselves. So yes, so their advice was to the 92-year-old man, go and get a plunger and see if you can unblock it yourself. That it's just not, and this was following work that Mears had done to address a leak, which had then sort of in part caused the issue. So I think we have to be actually the risk of what is it classed as an emergency in itself, because there are 2 incidences, there are more, and I have to say that the amount of issues that I'm experiencing in my ward from housing tenants is much higher than previous. I mean, I went, 2 years with nothing. It was fantastic, but that's not the case at the moment. So that is one thing that I think is not quite encapsulated in this report and is most definitely a risk, particularly around the heating situation, if that's not classed as an emergency, because we already have the issue with the winter fuel payments being withdrawn, that people already might not be using their heating as much, and actually we all know that if you stop using your boiler, you never know when it starts up again, how it's going to be. I say touching the wood with my boiler. The other thing is that we have again here the 4-day week about the risk of it stopping. We never seem to contemplate the risk of its continuation. I think this is something that, like many things, there are risks on both sides, depending on your point of view. And I don't think that we are managing the risk properly in only giving it one view. It's quite a biased binary view of it's just bad or it's a risk if it stops. I appreciate the financial consequences have gone away of the continuation of it, but there are other risks attached, and I would very much appreciate if that started to be reflected in our risk register.
Thank you. And just to pick up on those then, so I think the Mears risk, I think, is strategic risk 26. I agree, reading this particularly, so I suppose what we're really asking for in the leading to column, I think there could be a comment about prioritisation of work and classification of emergency. And I think perhaps in the resulting in, I think we're maybe perhaps slightly underselling the negative consequences. So talking about dissatisfaction, But I think what you're describing is something a bit stronger than dissatisfaction, which is, yes, I can't wordsmith on the fly, but kind of real impact on the quality of life for our tenants, as it were.
I was going to say, putting vulnerable residents at risk.
Yes, and whether that's and whether that needs to be reflected in the wording there, just so that that's repeatedly, because then that will then repeatedly be presented. On the 4-day week trial, I don't quite follow what you're. So at the moment, the risk we've got here is that the 4-day week does not succeed in its aims, and that leads to a revision to the 5-day week, and that's a risk. What is the risk that you would like, that you think should be included on the register that's not there? Sorry if I misunderstood, but I just want to give you an opportunity to spell it out a little.
So in relation to that risk, the risk is it doesn't, as is here, that it doesn't meet its names and therefore reverts back to a 5-day week. So the risk is losing the 4-day week, going to 5 days. But actually, the risk of continuation of a 4-day week as opposed to 5 days. Previously, it was only looked at from a monetary point of view, but actually the risk of putting people under that stress and strain, particularly we're seeing in waste crews, the fact they're having to walk further each day, there could be potential health impacts, stress, musculoskeletal issues, particularly in our waste crews. They're things that are being reported on in other areas, but I would say the physical and mental well-being of officers is a risk, because we need people performing well. Now, you could say then in the same way there are control mechanisms, there are reports and what have you that go to staffing, employment and such like, but it is a risk, and also capacity for the organisation is a risk. If there's potentially contract changes as well, there is a risk of union issues, because we have, even here as we sit here, we have some people that in our meeting today, some people are on 5 days, some people are on 4 days, because if it's a 3C, for example, IT and legal, they're not. And so there are risks attached to its continuation as well. So I just think, while we still don't know the future, we should be looking at both things, but particularly when it comes to welfare, because what we're actually seeing in the last reports was sickness increasing.
Thank you. So what you're suggesting is there should be a mirror image effectively to this risk, which is essentially that the 4-day week trial is deemed to be successful and is implemented, and there are potential risks in your view associated with that, and they should be reflected in the register, if I understood that correctly.
Yeah, well, the continuation of the 4-day week, there are potential negative impacts as well. At this stage, I think we should be looking at both.
Thank you. Perhaps, Mr. Ledger, you could take a view back to the senior leadership team to, perhaps consider some of the detail and some of the reports that have recently been considered by employment and staffing, and will, I think, soon be considered by the whole council, as to whether the outcome in which the 4-day week trial is extended or implemented more fully has risks attached, which should be considered at the strategic level, and suitable control measures put in place. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, more than happy to do that. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any further comments on the risk register? Councillor Stonebart.
Chair, thank you for a second go. These are really just comments. So I'm just going to comment on a couple of the entries. SR34 is the second one down on page 84, and it concerns extreme weather events occurring with increased frequency. We might say this risk is triggered, but it will be triggered in degrees, and there will be what we might regard as unusual weather conditions now might be succeeded by more extreme weather conditions in the years to come. But in a sense, this is a realised risk. And the attention and quite naturally of a strategic risk register is how do we keep the council running? But actually, there's more to it than just doing stuff here or with staff or out at the depot. I think there's quite a lot to do with how we interact with the community and parish councils, for example. So in the discussion last night about local government reorganisation, we touched on the capabilities of parishes as being expanded. So I'd just like to, suggest that, perhaps the breadth, the scope of this risk could be expanded to how are we best supporting our parishes, how are we enabling funding to create more robust solutions to community issues, higher steps, building or recognising, where flooding, local occasional flooding can take place. So that's SR 34. And the other is SR 41, which concerns the Cambridge Growth Company, and that's on page 85. Find it again. And I think this is really significant because it says there is a risk that Cambridge Growth Company produces plans which undermine the local plan. And that would carry huge implications. But I wonder if this is very different because this is an event almost. And I think it concerned underrepresentation in the process. And I just wonder if we're getting this right. I know it's a new risk, but for example, more involvement of members, just a stronger presence in the whole process. And I know we're talking about South Cambs interacting with national government, but I would say these are two qualitatively very different risks with their own seriousness, which could be pitched somewhat differently. So it's just a sample and some comments, but I hope that helps.
Thank you, Councillor Stokebart. That's very helpful. I'm sure Mr. Ledger has a note of those. Any further comments or questions on this? Councillor Leaming.
Thank you, Chair. I can see that we've had SR 41 and SR 42 added, but so that's the Cambridge Growth Company and local government reorganisation. But I think within SR 42, it perhaps would be helpful to cross-reference SR 41 because the combination of the two together actually could, that they have an interaction. The fact that we're being tasked as an organisation with growth at the same time that we're being asked to reorganise ourselves significantly, I think the two things interplay, and I think that needs to be noted in the register. The other thing I was going to ask was about the risk at the top of the register, which is the housing land supply. In the comments responding to it, there will be a review of the annual housing trajectory due in April 2025. Could I ask, please, that that update is given to all councillors as soon as possible, when it actually has taken place, so that we all have clarity about what that position is. Thank you.
Thank you. I think those are some reasonable observations, and I imagine that update on the housing land supply would come to all councillors, but yes, we should make sure that it does. Councillor Williams.
Just on the land supply, so some planning committee, we go into it in quite a lot of detail. What we've been told is there will be plans to brief planning committee and full council, probably in slightly different ways. Normally planning committee is more technical on how we process the applications, but I know myself and Councillor Hawkins have made the importance that all councillors have to get involved in planning at a ward member level, even if they're not on committee. So we have been told that will happen if that gives some reassurance.
Thank you, that's helpful. One comment from me, if I may, briefly, just on the new risk on local government reorganisation. I think it's very good to see that that's reflected, and I think it's been appropriately scored as to the kind of inherent risk. I think it's maybe a little premature to think that the control measures are having quite such a drastic effect on managing that down as is presented in this report. It feels a very uncertain and unknown moment, and so I think I'd be more comfortable seeing the residual score still remaining quite a bit higher than it is now, simply because it potentially affects every single aspect of the entire council, and we're currently in a period of very limited visibility as to how that might play out. So to my mind, I think it's brilliant that it's been included, and I think it's good to see those control measures coming in. I think it's just a little premature to think that those control measures are sort of managing the risk down to the extent that's presented. I hope nobody on the committee disagrees strongly with me making that suggestion. Any final comments or thoughts on this? No, thank you. We've been asked to review the current strategic risk register and the changes, making any comments or suggestions as appropriate. I think we have done that, so thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Ledger, for presenting the report and for taking our comments back to the leadership team. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Agenda item 8 is the new duty on the council around the failure to prevent fraud. I've got here Mr. Maddock has not been keen to present this report. Are you kicking off, Peter? Yes, so Mr. Maddock to present this report initially. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is coming to this committee as an information item, but also so that we can understand what obligations will be on us and organisations connected with us. So the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act, a bit of a mouthful, of 2023, has introduced a number of measures to combat and improve transparency. And one of those is to hold large organisations to account if they profit or attempt to profit from fraud. And this is referred to as a failure to prevent fraud. So this is actually coming into force on the 1st of September 2025, and organisations that fall within the scope of this offence will need to demonstrate that they have reasonable fraud prevention measures in place. This doesn't necessarily just apply to councils and big businesses, but other organisations and related parties are also deemed to be in scope. So you'll see at paragraph 7 the 3 criteria that will need to be satisfied to be in scope, i.e. the organisation has 250 or more employees, turnover exceeds 336 million and assets exceed 18 million, and the council falls in scope on all 3 of those counts. There's been a lot of guidance, and myself and Tara have been along to a number of webinars and guidance around this, trying to ascertain exactly whether we are or aren't in scope. And the consensus is that we are in scope. I think that's fairly clear. So having assessed that we are in scope, the view is that we should do some work around our processes, our procedures, just to make sure that they are indeed reasonable. And I think between now and the 1st of September, there'll be a bit of work being undertaken to assess whether we believe that we have reasonable processes in place. Now, of course, what's reasonable to me might be different to what's reasonable to somebody else. So this sort of thing can only really get tested, I suspect, in a court of law. But I think, as long as we do everything we possibly can, I think that's a reasonable approach to this. The other thing I mentioned is that organisations that are connected to or acting as agents for the authority also will fall within scope. So, for example, Ermine Street Housing will fall within scope as it's a wholly owned subsidiary, even though it doesn't meet 2 of the 3 criteria. I do believe there's a risk there that we need to look at, and certainly we'll be doing some work with Ermine Street in light of this legislation to make sure that there's everything that's going on, everything that's going on will meet this. And I think we're duty bound to do some work with them just to be absolutely certain on that point. I haven't particularly got anything specific, but it makes sense, I think, to do a little bit of work with them just to be sure. And although the other 2 companies are somewhat smaller, i.e. Shire Homes and Campbell Business Park Limited, again, because they're 100% subsidiaries, they would probably fall within scope. And again, I think we need to look at those 2 as well. And I say the offence is basically intended to encourage organisations to build within them an anti-fraud culture where fraud prevention measures are in place to prevent fraud. So I think it's really sort of an information item. Paragraph 11 shows the 6 principles behind what will be considered as reasonable measures, and you can see their commitment from senior management, carrying out fraud risk assessments, having proportionate risk-based procedures in place, due diligence, all the sort of things you'd like to think that we would do. So, I think it's important that we review some of our procedures to make sure that we meet those. That's there for information. I think it's fair to say that guidance is still evolving. It's taken some time to get to where we are. Guidance is still evolving, and it may well be that we report back to the next meeting if there's been further developments, but this is really just to put it on the committee's radar and make committee aware of the work that we're intending to do in the interim 6 months or so. Tara, I don't know whether there's any comments you'd like to make?
Thank you. So just building on what Peter said, to put a bit of sort of context around it, I think that the spirit of this Act is really to promote ethical business practices, and in its design was potentially directed at private businesses, but because of where we find ourselves, we're taking that approach that because we've got these businesses and we meet this criteria, that we should at least consider ourselves within scope, and that's something that the LGA has provided some guidance and information around, that, you know, particular areas we do believe that will be within that scope. So what we are doing at the moment, I think that we probably have to have a discussion around things about, you know, what is a reasonable measure. I think that some of these businesses could potentially benefit from some of the documents and governance that we've already got in place, but it would be good to get some clarification on whether there needs to be any standalone documents. But we are working with, or I am working with Ermine Street in the first instance to conduct a fraud risk assessment, particularly around their processes outside of an organisational one that we've already got, just to start moving that along and then look at what other things that we can do. We're in a relatively, I think, good position because we do have our strategy, we have our policy, we've started to identify organisationally what the fraud risks are, and so we've got that work in place, but it is about, I think, maybe doing some more specific work with those 3 businesses that come beneath us, which I will work to do.
Thank you both for presenting the report. Yes, I have to say, reading this, my first thought was there are probably some local authorities that aren't as far ahead in their journey towards anti-fraud as we are, and this has probably come as a bit of a shock and will be a bit of a challenge for them. Can I just ask, in terms of assessing the adequacy of the controls currently in place, who is it proposed to carry out that work? Is that being done?
I think one of the observations and one of the things I'd like to draw to everyone's attention is that with the fraud risk assessment process, it's really heavily reliant upon stakeholder engagement, and with challenging, agendas, etc., it can be difficult to get that kind of engagement from people. And so with the best will in the world, trying to work with people can be difficult, and trying to influence change where we have a difference of opinion or evidence to suggest that perhaps, you know, that the scoring, etc., should be slightly changed can be difficult. One of the challenges that we have continually faced is that when we'd make a recommendation around controls, etc., that we wouldn't necessarily see a positive change to those controls that is then being administered, and that's a real issue. So engagement and then actually taking on board that commentary around whether there are adequate controls. And one of the things that has been noted is capturing processes is very difficult. It shouldn't necessarily be, but being able to capture a process over specific areas can be quite difficult, and that's something that helps us to be able to understand and look at some of the aspects of this. And so we would appreciate some support really from leadership team to really help us to get our stakeholders to start to engage with us and treat it as a priority rather than something that is a tick box exercise against meeting other KPIs.
Thank you. Comments, questions from members of the committee? I've got Councillor Williams, Mr Freeman and then Councillor Leaming.
Just primarily to say, as Chair has said, you're in a good place. I have every confidence in our fraud team, and I think the work you're doing is very, very good. If I appreciate what you say from the point of view of senior leadership team taking it seriously and sort of enforcing it in their departments. If it's of any assistance, and I'm sure committee members will agree, that from a councillor's and elected members' perspective, nobody has a right to taxpayers' money for a fraudulent basis. And we will never be able to calculate how much is prevented, and I accept that. And I'm more than happy to give you as much support as I'm sure all council is, because it is a priority. What we sit here and we make decisions on is not our money, and it's not officers' money either. And if anybody is seeking to defraud, not us, but the taxpayer, then they need to be pursued. So you have a very strong mandate from us, and I hope that that will then be reflected in the senior leadership team.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, just to intervene quickly, I was going to ask if this had, what visibility this has had at senior leadership team in the organisation as a first port of call to getting sort of organisational buy-in.
So the leadership team have seen this report, and I raised it verbally originally, but they've seen this report, so they are aware of this. So yeah, and they were supportive. So yeah,
well, let's just make sure that
let's make sure that
well, and let's try and get some regular updates to them as well, and just make sure that it doesn't kind of disappear from their site forever. Mr Freeman, I'll bring you in now if that's okay.
Yes, of course, and I agree. The authority is in a good position given the risk-based approach to tackling fraud. There's one nuance in that doesn't appear in the report. I think it might be worth bringing to the attention of this committee. Is that one of the ingredients of the offence is that fraud must be committed with the intention of benefiting the organisation or its clients. So that's slightly different. So where South Cambs District Council is the victim of the fraud, that's a slightly different thing. It's quite difficult to me at the moment to think of an example whereby someone would seek to do something for the benefit of the council. But when we start to talk about those other bodies that are associated or owned by the council, those kind of risks start to bloom. So I think that the approach to fraud risk that as Nutbing King's already outlined, and working with those organisations to identify the fraud risks where the council or its subsidiaries may fall victim to fraud, but also may have agents acting in that way, is a very good approach. But just wanted to point out that it has to be with the intention of benefiting the organisation, although the definition of what that benefit isn't necessarily restricted to financial.
Thank you. You've actually answered one of the questions I was going to bring up, which was, yes, just to understand, because as you say, the fraud that we tend to, that we are most focused on is, fraudulent use of public money, which is still obviously a key issue that we need to be tackling, but that would not trigger this specific new offence that's coming in. But yes, there are probably ways in which frauds could be committed that could be deemed to have some benefit to the council, and they would trigger this new offence. But thank you for that clarification. Can I just bring in Councillor Leaming first?
Yep.
And then come back to you. Thank you. Councillor Leaming.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions about this in regards to both internal and external audit. So I'm wondering what work internal audit have done around this, sort of to embed this across the council. But I'm also wondering whether this would form part of the review of this would be part of the work plan of our external auditors, given that it will be a legal duty and part of our obligations under governance.
Thank you. Were those your only questions? Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Who wants to start picking up some of those comments? Yeah, Mr. Tully, you want to start? Thank you.
Happy to start because I can give a simple answer on the internal audit one. Yes, we're bringing this into our forward plan of work. I've already started to develop a plan for assurance in this area. We're sort of breaking it down into sort of a two-phase approach, one leading up to the implementation date of 1st of September, and then there's going to be some post-work as well just to make sure that it's been embedded successfully. But yeah, that's my plan of work.
It's probably worth noting we've also prepared a full presentation on this and the kinds of examples that have been given by the LGA where practical examples. Some of the things that are in the guidance are around things like salespeople, so they commit the primary offence, and then in getting more kind of income or whatever, they're basically inadvertently benefiting that company as well. So we are aware of what the offence involves. I do think it's quite difficult to think it through sometimes in terms of the fraud risk assessment specifically around that. You have to be quite creative, I think, but it might not be. Without looking at it, I think we need to understand what the processes are and if we can find anything. But we do appreciate that there's a primary offence needs to take place by a person, and then as a consequence we inadvertently benefit from it in some way. So we do understand that as part of the offence, and we can deliver the presentation when we're ready, and we will do that around the authority when we're asked to.
Thank you. Mr. Maddock, I'll come to you, and then I believe Mr. Calzona may want to comment from the perspective of our external auditors.
Yeah, just briefly. Sorry. Sorry, Peter. Yeah, just briefly from external audit, it is something that we do take into consideration. First and foremost, we will work with internal audit to see what they're doing and then determine whether we have to do additional work.
Thank you. Sorry, that was my fault for a poor introduction there. Back to you, Peter.
No, it's okay. Just something I wanted to add, and maybe I wasn't necessarily clear earlier, that agents of the council, organisations that provide service on behalf of the council, are also caught by this. So I think we need to think a little bit about that as well. I'm particularly thinking of our housing maintenance contractor, for example, who will provide. So I think that we need to have a discussion with them as well around what they're doing and what their understanding is as well.
Thank you. I think, unless there's anything else, I think that's been a very useful discussion. Thank you for putting it on our radar, as you put it. I think, yes, we would be keen to see this well as part of the wider anti-fraud piece, given a real level of prominence, both obviously for our agendas, but also for leadership team and across the rest of the councillors and officers of the organisation. So we've been asked to note the introduction of this new duty that's coming into effect from September, and we've been given an indication of the actions that officers are undertaking on behalf of the council. So thank you both for presenting that report. We move on to item 9, which is the Treasury Management Performance Report for the quarter ending 31st of December 2024. Who do we have to present? Is it Mr. Maddock? Are you presenting in the first instance? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the third quarter report on Treasury Management. As you'll be aware, we do an update on a regular basis on performance so far. So obviously this is up to the end of December. You'll see the usual tables within there. So for example, if you go to paragraph 18, you'll see what's happening on the investment front. Just out of it, it's just interesting to note that whilst at one stage we were investing quite a bit with banks, we're now getting better rates by investing with local authorities. So it's just interesting to see that this does sort of switch a bit between organisations. And at the moment we've got 35 million out with various local authorities. And I dare say that'll switch again depending on what the market's like, because it's not driven exactly by base rates. There's a bit of supply and demand that comes into play here. So our total investments at the end of December are standing at 170 million, so a relatively high level compared to what they were at the start of the year. We've also got our borrowing activity at paragraph 28 and beyond. So again, it shows our short-term and long-term borrowing, and we're expecting, our borrowing was at 280 million at the end of December. Primarily that's for our housing revenue account and the house building programme, but there is some general fund borrowing in there as well. There's a table around interest payments, interest income, etc. at page 32. And at the moment we're reporting a positive forecast in relation to our budgets on that as well, which is good news. I don't know whether there's any questions on any of that.
Thank you, Mr. Maddock. Any questions, comments on this report? Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. So when we go through it, I think there's just a few questions. I know we're trying not to let LGR dominate, but it inevitably, I'm afraid I'm going to have to go back there again. So just in relation to the borrowing, the forecast borrowing, I am aware, not of the details, but that there are rules when we're going through LGR, not to take out contracts for significant periods of time and not to take sort of loans and what have you. So are we doing essentially an audit of our policies and our programmes to make sure that we're compliant with any LGR requests? We're not forecasting to do something we need to borrow, which is actually we're not then going to. I'm thinking particularly around, we've got short-term borrowing, which I know we refinance because we're in this ridiculous situation where the interest rates on short-term were lower, but just are we potentially going to come a bit of a cropper because of the restrictions under LGR, and do we need to look at formalising that into long-term earlier? So that's my first question, Chair. The second question, and I'm looking predominantly at page 98 for members, so we can see when it comes to investments, that performance, and we have in there the commercial property rental income, and we've got a lot of reference to Ermine Street, which does feel sometimes like Councillor Howe's baby, and that's great. And we've got reference to Skip in there. What I can't see is how Skip is performing. Like, have we I don't believe we're sort of 13 million in, but I don't think we've had anything back yet. And actually an update as to where Skip is at in relation to the development that started and then had to stop just outside our building here. So is that, there's obviously been some sort of delay, or is that back on track, or is that a financial risk? But also, although it says commercial property rental, what we're not getting is that breakdown of how individual assets are performing, which may need to be on pink papers, but I think is important for us at the moment, and just reflecting on what the audit said about us having good scrutiny and oversight of investments. I'm trying to remember, is it the Vitrium building that we sold? Because we had that at one point, but I think we sold. So again, these have been going on for long periods of time. We've got various properties, some one I think has been sold, one haven't. So having that list sort of register for us to see and see its performance, I think would be good oversight as well. Because some investments we've made, we're not expected to make money for a period of time, and that's fine. But right now, I still don't feel we have good oversight of it.
Thank you. I'm going to suggest that we hold most of those questions for item 11, if you don't mind, when we are considering, I think, well, certainly Skip and some of the other investment properties in a bit more detail.
Can I just, in that case, add one thing as well? You said about local authorities.
Yes. Again,
that comes into LGR. Are there any risks attached with LGR to loaning to other local authorities that may not exist shortly?
That's a very good question. Nevertheless, I think perhaps for the annual outturn, if we could have a restricted paper that maybe breaks down the commercial property rental income. I don't think we necessarily need it on a quarterly basis, but it would be interesting to see at the end of the year if there's some kind of breakdown, maybe compared to asset values, what kind of return we're seeing. That might be beneficial. But would you mind just picking up Councillor Williams' questions about LGR, both for ourselves and for our counterparties?
So just on that point, so the final report has got some of that information in it that cartridge owners have provided, but obviously that's not actual information. So as you say, we can probably provide that next time round. Yeah, I mean, I do find the local government reform discussion quite interesting because, we've obviously got to have an eye on it, but there's a danger that it takes over absolutely everything, and suddenly you then don't do things that you were going to do. I know when the shadow authorities come in, at that point we're going to have to be, things are going to change, and we won't be able to do things necessarily that we might have done as a single authority. There's nothing planned within our capital programme that we wouldn't be doing anyway, and nothing particularly big. There's no additional borrowing that we're expecting to make. I know we have an investment strategy allocation in the budget. The only thing I suspect we might spend that on is related to Northstowe at the moment, and there's no reason why we'd stop doing what we're doing at Northstowe. We've been doing that for a number of years, and we'll still be doing stuff at Northstowe when local government review comes in. So I don't see there's anything there that we shouldn't be doing. I think with regard to our loans, it's still a little bit up in the air. I mean, quite clearly our long-term housing revenue account loans, whatever the successful authority is, will have to take that over, and that'll be happening across the country. A lot of our borrowing is actually short-term, particularly on the general fund, and that has been to take advantage of lower rates than would have been if we'd gone longer term. I think it's probably also, it's fair to say that, again, the borrowing that we've taken out, which relates to our investments such as Ermine Street and our commercial property, that will be a decision for the new authority. As far as I'm aware and concerned, we'll be providing this information to the shadow authority. They will know that we have these investment assets, and they will pass over to that organisation, and it will be for the new organisation to decide whether we continue with them, sell them, or do whatever. But I don't see there's anything particular that we're doing that would contravene anything that's happening with the local government review at this stage. And it was a veteran building we sold.
Yeah. Thank you. Are there any further comments or questions on this report in front of us? Councillor Stobart.
Well, just a brief comment and question. Of course, the Treasury management process is supported by consultation and advice. That's part of the framework in which we operate. So the question is, what's the nature of that advice at the moment? Is it shifting? I mean, there is disturbance in the global economy. Is that having an implication?
So, so the advice that we've been receiving hasn't changed drastically. We are expecting to see interest rates come down. Okay, it's been a lot slower, and the view and the advice that we're getting is that don't borrow too long term on the basis that when you refinance, it's likely that interest rates will be lower. Now I know we've not got a crystal ball, but I mean, that's been the advice for a while. The advice is still, really to look at shorter term because we tend to get better value from that. And to be honest, it's been like that for 5 or 6 years. I mean, the advice is, we have meetings with them on a regular basis. Advice is revisited. But certainly in the last couple of years, advice has been generally stick with shorter term. We think interest rates are coming down, but we don't know when. I mean, we've seen predictions of that. So we have regular meetings with them, and I'm sure when the advice changes, they'll make us aware of it, and we'll maybe adjust what we do in light of that. But certainly at the moment, it's been pretty consistent over the last few years.
Yeah, a story of ongoing volatility, I think. But yes, thank you. Any final comments or questions? No, thank you. So we've been asked to review the Treasury management activity and performance for the quarterly period to December 2024, which we have done. On agenda item 10 is our regular governance, risk and control update. Thank you, Mr. Tully, for waiting to this point in the meeting. Could you please present your report?
Thank you very much. Morning, everyone. So we're now into the depths, page 109 of our agenda pack. I'm afraid it's another long one. So to just delve into the highlights of this report, I'll invite you to go to page 112 first, which is just audit updates in the last quarter. We completed a review of the housing fire safety compliance So at the moment, we're working through a whole sort of suite of different elements of HRA, housing, safety, compliance areas. In fact, Councillor Howell mentioned earlier on about damp, mould and condensation. That's one that's on our future programme of work. This one focused on basically fire risk and how those risks are being managed. Overall, a very positive review. The housing team very much focused on managing those risks. As part of our work, we looked at policies, frameworks, and also sample tested some of the supporting information underneath it. We also looked at things called tenant satisfaction measures, which are new returns which have to be sent back to housing regulator. So that was 100% compliance on those, which provide assurance that all the fire risk assessments have been completed. Actions do get identified as part of this risk management process, which is quite normal. And what we've seen is that the number of high actions has steadily been decreasing year on year. So that's providing positive assurance in that area. Next, I would direct you to page 114, where we have our regular counter-fraud statistics. Probably just a couple of things to highlight on there. The team is using the new system to record statistics, so any feedback on those would always be welcome. And also the National Fraud Initiative. The biennial, that's every 2 years, matches were released at the beginning of January. And you can see from there that we've already processed 699 records to date. So that's records processed by both the fraud team, counter-fraud team and internal audit. And that's actually a really, really good positive start to that, to get going. So very pleased with that. Then I would take you on to page 117, where we introduce Audit Committee Annual Report. And that report is actually on sort of page 121 of your packs. It seems like quite a long way away, but it's good practice for the committee to prepare an annual report to those charged with governance. Those charged with governance, of course, means full council. So convention is we present it to full council as part of the annual meeting. Our next audit committee, I think, is scheduled after that. So we just wanted to get something shared as soon as possible, really, with you. So what you've got there in your packs is a draft report. The format that we used last year was very well received. So basically, we've gone with that again. And what we've done is basically put in sort of factual information, things that the committee have done at this stage of the year. So some statistics will continue to be updated by the end of the month. We've got a more fuller picture. But I just want to say, hopefully, happy to take feedback on that straight away. But we've got up until the annual meeting to update it. So I would stress it is the report of the committee. So your input is very valuable there. But if you've got any immediate feedback, happy to take that on board. And that's, I think, everything that I wanted to pick out of that report. Happy for comments or questions.
Thank you. And yes, thank you for giving us a draft annual report at this early stage. I think that's, I really welcome that, and that's a good opportunity for the committee members to review that. I think if you have detailed kind of comments or questions, happy to take them now. It may also be something that we address by, happy to take, detailed suggested changes by email rather than trying to write a report in a live committee. Clearly, we need to get a photo of Mr. Freeman. He's looking, he needs the due prominence that he deserves in that table. You don't escape without an embarrassing photo in this job. But yes, I'm sure there'll be some other comments as well. Councillor Williams, I think I saw you indicating, and then I'll come to any other members of the committee.
Thank you, Chair. And just on photos, at least yours won't be after you've had about 3 hours sleep, as mine is, because immediately on 2018, when we were put in front of the wall to have as new councillors at the count when you've been up for the verification for hours. However, Councillor Howe has updated his photo since he was first elected, after apparently I said that he was committing fraud because his photo looked nothing like him anymore. It was not valid ID. So yes, but photos aside, feel free to remove the photos if you wish to, from my point of view. But when it comes to the report, when you were referencing sort of not the appendix, when it shows about whistleblowing, so I'm just getting the page 115. As I said, we obviously did some time ago now a subcommittee for it and task and finish group. And one of the things was around the advertising. It kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier about RIPA and communication and advertising. And I just wonder, we also, the work that we did around it and accessibility was a pre-COVID world. And just whether actually we need to kind of look at this again, maybe as a piece of work. For members that weren't involved in it, it was, yes, reviewing policies, but mainly looking about the communication and how we could, because again, we got zeros for a long time, which is lovely, but we shouldn't take it for granted that that's a fair reflection. So perhaps that's something that we might revisit or take a look at as a committee as a whole. It was just 3 of us that did it last time, because, you know, the world has changed and things probably need to be a lot more online than before. We were talking about, you know, rotating things behind toilet doors and stuff like that to make people, giving people safe spaces and what have you to look at these. And it sounds a strange thing, but the whole point was not to put it on the big posters, because then somebody would see you, if you're a whistleblower, they might see you taking down the details. So we made sure that there was things in more discreet places. But I'm just wondering whether some flesh on that might be helpful, and that would tie in from other potential policy areas as well.
Thank you. I'm sure you're happy to take that away, Mr. Tully.
Yeah, I agree with that, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Any other comments, questions? Councillor Leeming, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to update that on page 124, Councillor Jeff Harvey is no longer a member of this committee.
That's an excellent spot. Thank you very much. I know. No, leave him on there just with a big black line through the middle of his photo. Just, yes. Thank you. Yes. Yes, well, you can date when you join the council from those. Any other further comments or questions at this stage? Councillor Howell is nursing his wounds. Thank you. So yes, happy to. So I think we're sort of happy, particularly with the annual report in its kind of draft stage. But as I say, if you want to make suggestions of further amendments by email, either to myself and or ideally to Mr. Tully, then we'll be happy to take those and update those ahead of it going to the annual meeting. Councillor Leeming has spotted another inaccuracy, I fear.
Not another inaccuracy. I was just wondering if it would be a good idea to include the Nolan principles in it, just as a thing of good governance.
Always a good idea. Thank you. Yes. Jeff was, oh no, there's a good question. Yes, I think Jeff was at the beginning of the financial year, so we may need to, yeah, maybe, thank you. Good, so we've been asked to note the report, and we have done so. Thank you. Members, I'm minded to kind of crack on at this point and then let you go for lunch when we've finished, unless anybody is particularly in need of sustenance. I'm seeing a grim determination on faces. So item 11 then, please, which is the report on investment returns that we were very keen to see. It was sent to you in a supplementary pack, so you may need to be looking somewhere else in your files, electronic or otherwise. Please could Mr. Maddock present this report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So you've got a report before you that looks at our investment strategy purchases. So I've tried to wrap up most of the stuff that's within that. There's a bit of commentary as to why authorities have looked to invest in commercial properties. I think it's fair to say, because of the squeeze in central government finances, that a lot of authorities have looked to purchase commercial properties to gain an income stream. I've also commented about Ermine Street, that was set up in 2014 to buy properties and let out at market rents. I think it's fair to say that's provided a significant income stream to the council over the intervening years, and it's also fair to say it's one of the reasons the council's in the financial situation that it is. So I think, you know, I do think it was a really shrewd move, to be honest. But equally, it has been a factor in our, our financial success, I think. During 2019, we did actually create an investment strategy, and the idea was that it was to govern the investment in commercial property. And at the time, the idea was that we were going to invest in commercial property purely for a return. And the thinking behind this was, again, it would provide additional income for our general fund, and it sort of diverses our investments a bit. So not only have we got a housing company and our general treasury investments, we've also got some commercial property investments. And at the time, income from our investments in banks, building societies were extremely low. We had quite a lengthy period of very low interest rates. And we did indeed invest in a number of properties between March 2019 and November 2020. So the reason things dried up a little bit in November 2020, and members may well be aware of the consultation that was issued by central government, where they were getting increasingly nervous around local authorities, particularly investing in slightly high risk commercial investments rather than commercial investments generally. So the consultation was intended to try and curtail local authority investment in commercial assets, primarily for yield. And the outcome of that consultation was effectively that if a local authority did decide they wanted to continue to invest for yield, then they would not be able to borrow from the Public Works Loan Board, which is the organisation which a lot of local authorities borrow from to invest in their capital programme. And particularly for this council, this was clearly a factor because of our ambitious house building programme, and we knew that we were going to need to borrow for that, and actually the cheapest place and the best place to borrow for that was in fact the Public Works Loan Board. So that was why it was decided not to pursue commercial investments for yield. So again, there's a bit of commentary on Ermine Street housing. We've been roughly getting 3.85 million per annum in interest. Well, it's been building up to that, but with the 100 million that we've got there, 3.85 million is roughly the interest that we've been getting from that. I think it's fair to say at the moment we could possibly get a higher rate from investment opportunities elsewhere, but as financial advisors will always tell you, we're in it for the long haul, and there will be times when you get better rates from one compared to another. So I've then provided a bit of commentary on our investment property portfolio. I asked Carter Jonas to do an analysis of our investment properties, what sort of return we were getting, and they've provided a report at Appendix A. So that's outlining the sort of return that we're getting. I think it's also worth noting that whilst treasury investments, you're investing just for interest, you are also potentially getting capital gains on our commercial properties and indeed the properties that are in Ermine Street. So there's sort of two ways of getting a gain from those. I've also commented on our land holdings. So whilst these aren't specifically investment properties, we have a number of land holdings, 3 to be precise, across the district, which we paid 8 billion for. That's now worth about 15 million. So again, those land holdings, we have to treat them as surplus land. Okay, two of the pieces of land relate to Northstowe, and there are plans to do something with that land, but nevertheless, we have to treat them as surplus land. Again, we've seen a reasonable appreciation in value on those land parcels since they were purchased. I haven't been able to provide too much information in relation to SCIP, mainly because a lot of the information, certainly the detailed information, was in private session, but we obviously can't discuss that. We have lent 13 million to them for the purchase of the land out there, and that's in the public domain because it's been reported in our accounts. We haven't at the moment got the latest cash flow report from Skip, which we'll need to review at some point. But I can't really comment much more on Skip in this meeting without sort of going into details that we probably shouldn't do. And I think that's probably about it. But I think broadly, I think it's fair to say I think our commercial properties have done pretty well, and I think the return is pretty reasonable. If anybody's got any questions on that, I may need to go back to Carter Jonas for some of the detail, but broadly a lot of the information on our investment properties in there.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Maddock. I'll come to you in just a moment, Councillor Williams. Just as a kind of preliminary, what do we think would be a good cadence, a good frequency for this report or similar to come before this committee? Do we think the committee should see this annually, perhaps, or something of this nature? I mean, I know we see the Treasury management side quarterly, but obviously that's a lot more short-term and a lot more ins and outs, as it were. Are we happy to see something like this on an annual basis? Does that seem reasonable? Yeah. Okay, good. So we'll expect to see something similar to this on an annual basis in the future. That'd be very good. One question I had is that we have put the Carter Jonas report, or at least currently the Carter Jonas report is in the public domain. Is that a conscious decision? It contains a level of contractual information that I wouldn't normally expect to see in the public domain.
So I did raise this point with Carter Jonas, and certainly things like investment returns, we obviously report that in relation to all of our other investments. I don't see that being any different. I did check with Carter Jonas that they were happy for this to be in the public domain, and they were happy with that.
Fair enough.
That was my concern as well.
Okay, no, I imagine it's been looked at. I'm keen to stay in open session if at all possible, so I'd rather not to discuss the particular information relating to Skip that was discussed in closed session on a previous occasion. So, but if members particularly want to go into that, then obviously we can. I'd just rather not as a preference. Councillor Williams, please.
So my questions are around Skip, but I believe can be kept in the public domain. So I sort of tried to ask some in the previous one what to do with Treasury management, trying to avoid that. But in this situation, I think the planning is sort of issues are in the public domain because the planning committee looked at it. The work started, the work stopped. I'm aware that there were some issues in relation to the planning consents, and that there's potential that it could potentially come back to committee in some variation. So from a planning point of view, I appreciate we might need this, not from Mr. Maddox is looking at me like, don't ask me anything about planning, but to get some idea as to where we're at, because I think there is, if we do have to go through another planning process, there is potential delays. So my question for the purposes of the finances, are we expecting to see returns from Skip as scheduled or not, which I don't think is something that, is commercially sensitive. And then if I think would be sensible, we could have an update on the planning status, because that seems to be a big factor in that. Are we expecting to see returns from Skip? It's very horrible to hear your own voice come through. Can we have some idea as to where we're at? I appreciate we're not sitting here as planning committee, but it is a big factor into the success or not of at least the first initial development.
Thank you, Mr. Maddock. I think it's reasonable to say that obviously the committee, is perhaps a little concerned as to the kind of visibility of the kind of financial implications of what's changing around Skip. Is there anything more you can tell us from your perspective as head of finance as to how this is affecting the authority in a financial sense?
So we are expecting for there to be a positive return from the scheme, and we're still expecting that. Obviously, things have changed. I haven't seen the latest. We have requested the latest update, but I've got no reason to believe there won't be a positive return from the scheme, despite the delays. Sorry?
Yeah, Chair, if I can just clarify, my thing is, it's not, you know, not that we won't get return, but obviously when we do these investments, there's sort of a schedule of when we expect to receive the return that comes into our budget. So is there any budget impact in a delayed return on it?
So obviously I've seen cash flows that show when the returns are going to come in now. The fact that we started later, that returns are going to obviously come in later. To be honest, I hadn't banked on any of the returns in any of our budget forecasting, to be honest. We know we're going to get a return, but I think there's a level of risk around, is it going to be this or this, or that we haven't actually assumed in any of our financial planning that return is going to be used for something else. So we've taken quite a prudent approach at this stage, simply because we don't actually know exactly when this is going to come in, and without saying too much, given the delays we've experienced, we could be looking at when we're no longer here as an authority. I'm honest.
Thank you. Briefly, if you like, so I'd like to bring in other councillors as well. Yeah.
Thank you for that, and I think that's sort of where I'm going as well, sort of where it falls in the MTFS and etc. So that sounds a good outcome, and I have to say that the news that the Balfour Beatty partnership is going, I didn't support it at the time, so I'm quite pleased to see that, and I don't think anybody should be concerned about it.
Thank you. Councillor Howell, come to you.
As long as we've not wasted money on it, obviously.
Councillor Howell and then Councillor Stobart, I think.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. With regards to paragraph 12, which is on page 5, can I just say on that one, hold your nerve, which I'm sure you're doing. Yes, it is long term. Yes, we have got to not can't swap and change. Totally agree. Just two more things. First of all, something historic. When we looked at Ermine Street and we put it together, investment and a return doesn't necessarily mean at the time a cash investment and a cash return. We can invest something and hopefully put something back into the community. One of the things we didn't do it initially because it was, it wasn't a priority, is to invest in small industrial units to help businesses start. Now, the return we might get back from that might be quite minimal, if at all, but it was to help and invest into the community of South Cambridgeshire. Can I just remind you of that? And also, I can remember standing up for, well, I think I hold the record, something like 2.5 hours when we went and put Ermine Street housing together, but also to ask the council, could we go out and loan money? And we loaned quite a considerable, we had permission of the council to loan quite a considerable amount of money. I'm thinking it was around 200 million we could invest, but I can't remember the amount. I'm asking you, do you know the amount we had of permission of the council to invest in Ermine Street housing? Thank you, Chairman.
So it was a 100 million initially. Sorry?
I'm so sorry. I think if you go back, and I'm going back quite a while now, obviously, there is something where we could invest. We have permission of the council to invest quite a lot more if we wanted to. I can't remember the figure, but I'm sure it was more than 100 million.
I'm sure we can check what ceiling was set on it.
It's something in the council, so something for you to look up.
Yeah, okay. that would be good. Councillor Stobart, I'd like to bring you in, please.
So, thank you, Chair. I'm going to just pick up the point on South Cambridge project, so the partnership with Balfour Beatty Investments, strictly the corporate entity is Balfour Beatty Investments. And going way back, the intention was to work with Hill in Skip on housing and with Balfour Beatty Investments on, if you will, that kind of industrial sector. And of course that changed with time. I think with Balfour Beatty's view that actually, in fact, build to rent was a more attractive proposition. And I think that's what led to a long period of inactivity in that there wasn't a meeting of minds. But I think once having set up a partnership, it's important to kind of explore the possibilities and looking at what we've been doing with Balfour Beatty Investments, it's been the occasional meeting, and actually a relatively small amount. It's just supporting the staff costs of an occasional meeting. Now, I've got to be quite unspecific here, but around about 12 months ago, Balfour Beatty Investments brought an idea, and in fact it was a little more than an idea, it was a proposition, which the council, and I don't say the council in general, but I believe that the possibility was investigated by informal cabinet, and it was decided not to proceed. Now, I'm just challenging the statement that there was no activity, and in fact, I would expect on the basis, I mean, you might challenge this, but on the basis of that one proposition, which I think was quite well attuned to the current, to the situation in, you might say, Greater Cambridge at that time, we would expect more activity in due course. So I think what I'd like to do, let me cut to the chase, that keeping a partnership like this open, if it's not absorbing a lot of resource, continues to have value. And I think it would be part of the relationship scenery, if you will, as we proceed with the expansion of Cambridge. To have that relationship, I think, would be important to us, and leaves open the possibility of future projects, the nature of which we might not yet have identified. So I would say there is activity, there is little cost associated with it, and Balfour Beatty Investments, big organisation, but have been so far, relatively straightforward to deal with, and very clear in their objectives. So I would suggest that working with Balfour Beatty Investments could be rewarding and straightforward. So I'd say let's not wind it up, because I don't think there's a strong basis for doing that. And I would say keep it going on the basis of what we've seen. It could be fruitful in due course.
Thank you very much for sharing that perspective. Councillor Williams, did you want to comment on this particular point?
Yes, thank you. I have to be slightly careful because when we had the debate on going into partnerships, it was pink papers and confidential sessions. So I'm going to stray as far as I dare, Chair, on the advice that we were given previously, which is to say whether you supported it or not. What I would assume is that the decision to go into partnership was made by full council. The decision to wind up, as was with the Vitram building, lies with full council. And I think there will be, at that point, an opportunity for all members to share their views. But I would stray away, potentially, from opening that debate here, Chair. And that is a matter for full council with everybody and the appropriate reports brought to consider. Because while I take your points and experience, Councillor, but also a lot of the devil can be in the detail with these things. And there were very valid reasons why some members, and on some investment decisions, without going into the details, they've not always been done on political terms. I think there was one thing, where actually it was our votes that got it over the line. So these things are very difficult. They are risks, and there are reasons why individuals feel they can or can't support certain investments. And as Councillor Howell said, he stood for 2.5 hours as the portfolio holder in that investment decision originally. They're not easy decisions that full council takes, and it's why full council should take them. So reassurance on the governance arrangements for winding up the partnerships that it will be full council, and I look forward to hearing your views and comments on that at that stage. But I think for today, we know there is an intention to wind it up, but not a decision to wind it up. And I'm assuming we'll have that debate in due course at full council.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Williams. Yes, I mean I am eager that this is not a forum, obviously, for making management decisions. But I think Councillor Stobart has reasonable objections to the wording of this report at paragraph 22, which I think is the basis of his comments. So I wonder, Mr. Maddock, if we could just reflect a little on some of the discussion we've had here around that particular contract, and just make sure that in future work on this matter, we're reflecting as accurately as we can the situation and the experience. I do appreciate this report was obviously put together, at some speed, but I think there's some important reflections that need to be included in future discussions of that. Thank you. Are there any further comments or questions on this report? I mean, I think in general we can say it's a bit of a shame we can't invest for yield anymore, given the successes that we've had over the last 5 years. But given the experience of perhaps some other councils in this domain, it may well nevertheless have been a sensible decision for the national government to make. So thank you. So we've been asked to note the report on non-treasury management investments, including the report from Carter Jonas. We have done so, and we look forward to seeing another update on this in 12 months' time. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Maddock, for presenting that. Agenda item 12, matters of topical interest. Do any members or officers have anything they want to raise under this item that's not otherwise been considered at the meeting? Thank you. Well, thank you all very much for your attendance and attention today. I would just like to take a brief moment to say thank you to Mr. Maddock. I believe this will be his last audit and corporate governance meeting before his retirement. Just for my part, I've felt very well supported by him in the years that I've been on this committee, and I may go as far as to speak for the committee in saying that I'm sure we've all felt the same way. And you have guided us and answered our questions very appropriately and very effectively over the last few years, and we will be sorry to not see you in your role any further. Councillor Williams, did you want to say something?
Thank you. Yes, just to echo that from sort of our side of the chamber, as it were. I remember my first sort of meeting with Mr. Maddox was with Mr. Roth as well, if you remember Mr. Roth when he first started, and the support that you've given us from day one till, I'm sure, the end of your time at South Cambs has never faltered. It's been consistent, it's been valuable, and our sector has a great loss with your retirement, though I'm sure you'll be having much more fun than sitting with us at audit meetings. And we will have further opportunities to say goodbye, but it is not an easy thing to say.
Thank you.
Thank you for those kind words. I have enjoyed working with the committee. I do thank you for your support over the last few years. I think it's now 6 years. It's been pretty tough getting the accounts up to date, but I must say that the support of this committee has been absolutely superb, and I've thoroughly enjoyed working with you all. I've got a sort of leaving do sort of Tuesday after Cabinet, so you're all welcome to come along and say your goodbyes. But yeah, my official last date is the 31st of March, though I am going to be providing a bit of support after I've gone, on the basis that, as you're probably all aware, Fazana Ahmed's going to be taking over, but unfortunately we haven't been able to recruit to her existing role. So I'm going to be providing a little bit of support in the interim just to sort of get us over, particularly the 3 months of the final accounts. So, but thank you for your kind words, and thank you for your support. It's really appreciated.
Thank you, Mr. Maddock. May I remind members the next meeting of this committee will be on the 10th of July at 10 a.m. and I'll bring this meeting to a close at 12:53. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you, Chair.
Bye all.